Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I want everybody to know that there is a website by a news reporter. It's Heather Catallo Rubber Stamping. That's Heather, and then Catallo is spelled Catallo, and then the word rubber stamping. If you go online and look at that, you'll see how Michigan Child Protective Services is wrongfully sending police to people's homes, especially single mothers, and just taking their children from them because CPS manipulates cases, and the courts there are letting probation officers rubber stamp invalid child removal orders. Um, they're just taking kids without giving them documentation. They don't even give the parents documentation. They just come and take the kids, and then the parent never gets a hearing, and then the kid is either put up for adoption, an out-of-state adoption, which goes for $7,500. An in-state adoption is $3,500, or they put them in foster care and they get federal funding to put the kids in unnecessary programs, making the kids look like they were abused and neglected. They manipulate the case. The parent never gets to have a hearing. They violate the parent's right to a hearing, the right to an appeal, anything basically. The parents are unheard, and they do this targeting single mothers. If you go on that website I gave you, Heather Catallo, rubber stamping, you'll see it because they rubber stamp judges' names on removal orders, probation officers at the Lincoln Hall of Justice, which is the juvenile court in Detroit, Michigan. They've been doing this for years, I guess, and that's what the news reports on, is how Child Protective Services has been taking children for years and just manipulating cases and just wrongfully removing children. And as you see, one attorney says on the website that this is like kidnapping. It's the same thing as kidnapping, and these people are not being held accountable. There was one police officer who went to court in Detroit, and he admitted that in his scope of duties, it's not his job to remove children. Um, Child Protective Services, also known as ACS, is not supposed to take children unless there is a valid removal order signed by a judge, and only once a judge has reviewed the evidence given under oath by a social worker or protective service worker, child protective service worker, then a judge can decide whether or not there is an immediate removal of the child necessary. And the parent is supposed to be present in the courtroom, and the parents are not allowed to go to court, which is against the law. Um, the news reporter interviewed the judge, Leslie Kim Smith, which had no comment, and the news reporter asked the judge, why are you letting probation officers stamp these invalid child removal orders? And this has been going on for quite some time, and there's a lot of kids who are literally unlawfully taken from their parents, and the news has reached out to get Eric Holder, the U.S. attorney, involved, which I don't think Eric Holder has been involved, or I'm not sure if they even contacted him at this point. But Child Protective Services has been violating people's rights and just meeting their quotas by taking kids. And they went as far as wrongfully imprisoning me, saying I was wanted on a kidnapping charge, sending federal marshals to our apartment in New York without a warrant. They lied to the state of New York and said that Michigan lied to the state of New York. Detective Muscat from Dearborn, Michigan, lied to federal marshals here in New York and sent Greg Holm, a federal marshal, to our home in Brooklyn, me and my son and our roommate and the tenants in the building in apartment 1F in Brooklyn all witnessed this, as a federal marshal and other federal marshals came and invaded our apartment and just took my son without any documentation being served to me, never told me why they were taking my son, and my son just wrapped his arms around me and said, please don't take me from my mom. So the marshal knew this was my child, but yet I was wrongfully imprisoned for 30 days, held without a hearing. Judge never read me any charges, but the legal aid lawyer gave me a bunch of fraudulent paperwork written up by the 5th Precinct stating that I had been arrested on 500 Pearl Street, which that was not true. Me and my son were removed out of our Brooklyn apartment in apartment 1R, who we lived with, Alexander Moore, who was our roommate, and there was never no warrant, and that's why I was released out of jail. There was never no case. They had me wrongfully imprisoned, the state of Michigan did, just so they could take my child. They have everybody's social security number in the system. They know who every U.S. citizen is, and that's how Child Protective Services targets single mothers. They target single mothers living on Section 8 and on welfare, and then they go in for the kill. They go in to remove their children and invade their homes, and they're supposed to come with a valid removal order by a judge, but they're sending cops and federal marshals to just take kids. And then when the police and marshals arrive, they know the child is not in no immediate danger whatsoever, and they never have a warrant to enter the premises, which in the Heather Cataldo rubber stamping website I gave you earlier, you'll see how one lady was invaded by cops with no warrant to get in her house, and the cop admitted that is not in their scope of duties to remove children. If there's a dire need of emergency, a cop can arrive at a home, yes, but my child was never in no immediate danger. I was never given a hearing within 72 hours, which a family law attorney here in New York told me I had the right to a hearing within 72 hours when they took my child, which I was never given a right to a hearing, never presented with no documentation. ACS never came. Just these marshals who were in an unmarked car, no documentation, no badge. And only me, when I did my own investigation, I went to the U.S. Marshal's office and I had told them what happened, and they told me to come back in a week or two. And when I did, they had given me the name of the marshal, who I guess was sent on a fraudulent claim by Michigan, but that claim was dismissed here in court. And yet Michigan took my son out of the state of New York across state lines, which I consider that to be interstate kidnapping, because you cannot extradite nobody without a warrant. And that's what they put on paperwork, is that they were going to extradite my child and try to extradite me, which that never happened, because my legal aid lawyer here in New York tried to coerce me into signing a waiver of right, or a waiver of a right to an issuance of a warrant of extradition, which I refused to sign. And my child is not a criminal, so they could not have legally extradited him, because only criminals are extradited from state to state or from country to country. You can't extradite somebody without a governor's warrant. And they never had a governor's warrant or a warrant to come in my home or a judge's order at no point to ever remove my child. And my case was dismissed and my child was never returned to me. So I can only assume he was taken out of the state, and that Detroit is doing their illegal proceedings unlawfully, which they're known to do, which no higher court has stepped in. And maybe the United States citizens and the higher courts need to advocate that this court stop their wrongful and illegal practice and imprison the people who are doing this, who are breaking the law. Because that's why we have the Constitution, to protect every U.S. citizen's rights. And people and cops and marshals can't just come in homes without a warrant and just kidnap people out of their home. But yet if we were to take someone out of their home or off the street, we would be charged with kidnapping and we'd be in federal prison. But these people are getting away with this, and CPS, Child Protective Services, are the ones ultimately, I believe, to be held accountable, because they're the ones making up fraudulent claims to victimize these parents and children, and then alienate and abandon the mother from the child. And then that just, deeply affects the mother and child, who loved each other so much and whose lives were torn apart by these unlawful and fraudulent, fictitious, malicious, intentional lawbreakers of Child Protective Services, who invade and have our lives torn apart. And they're the ones who ought to be held accountable and put in prison or given the death penalty.